Let me tell you something about golden children, not the concept in the abstract, the actual people, the ones who exist in real families, who are handed the narrative of exceptionalism so early in life that they forget it was ever handed to them and begin to believe it was discovered. Golden children are, in my experience, extraordinarily fragile, not on the surface. On the surface, they are loud, entitled, magnetic in the way that a fire is magnetic, impressive from a distance, dangerous if you stand too close. But underneath the performance, underneath the designer clothes and the strategic friendships and the constant, exhausting need to be witnessed, there is a person who is terrified. Terrified specifically of the sibling they spent years diminishing, because somewhere in the architecture of their arrogance they know, they have always known, that the diminishment was a strategy, not a verdict. My sister Vivian spent approximately 15 years trying to convince everyone around her, including herself, that I was beneath her. She invited me to her exclusive country club on a Thursday afternoon to finish the job publicly, in front of the man she was planning to marry, in front of her carefully curated social circle, in front of security personnel she intended to weaponize against me. What she did not know was this: I own the club's debt. I am the primary shareholder who kept that institution solvent when it was 40 days from bankruptcy. And the man she was planning to marry, the club's director, whom she had been performing for across 11 months of orchestrated proximity, had been mine for 2 years. She wanted to have me escorted off the property. Instead, she lost her social life, her membership, and her carefully constructed reputation in approximately 5 minutes. Settle in. This one is worth savoring. My name is irrelevant for our purposes, but here is what you need to know about me. I am 30 years old. I am a commercial real estate investor and developer. My portfolio spans 4 states, includes 11 properties, and generated, at last year's accounting, enough income that my accountant asked me twice in the same meeting if I was comfortable with the tax liability. I am. I drive a 4-year-old Honda CR-V with a cracked passenger-side mirror that I keep meaning to fix. I wear clothes that are well made and quietly expensive in a way that communicates nothing to anyone who hasn't been trained to read them. I do not post on social media. I do not attend the events that people attend to be seen attending. I own a very good watch that lives in my desk drawer. This is what people in certain circles call stealth wealth, though I prefer to think of it simply as not caring whether strangers understand my net worth. Status as a concept has always bored me. What status actually is, when you strip away the performance, is a request for other people's validation, and I gave up requesting validation from other people's opinions a long time ago. Specifically, around the time I was 17 and realized that no quantity of achievement was going to earn my sister's respect, because her contempt for me was not a conclusion she had reached, it was a role she had been assigned. Vivian is 4 years older than me. She is beautiful in the way that people who were told they were beautiful from childhood are beautiful, with a kind of ownership over it, a comfort in it that reads as effortless until you watch closely enough to see the maintenance. She was the daughter my parents' social circle complimented at dinner parties. She was the one who got the good bedroom, the better university fund, the benefit of every doubt. I was the one who was difficult, too quiet, too serious, not quite fitting in. The translation of all of these things, which I did not have the vocabulary for at 17, but understand completely now, is I was not performing the script that made other people comfortable. And in families where a script exists, the person who refuses to perform it is not admired, they are managed. My father would say things like, "Try to be more like Vivian. She makes people feel welcome." He meant, be louder, be warmer, be more immediately legible to people who haven't bothered to look past the surface. He didn't mean it cruelly, that's perhaps the most complicated part. I left at 22 with a business administration degree, $12,000 in savings, and a specific, crystallized understanding of what I was building toward. I spent my 20s in focused, largely joyless acquisition, not of things, but of assets, of relationships with people who operated at the level I intended to reach, of knowledge about how capital actually moves through the world. I did not tell my family the details of what I was building. This was not passive aggression, it was risk management. Information shared with people who weaponize it is a liability, not a gift. Every Christmas, when I returned, Vivian would make the same category of joke. My car, my clothes, my little job. The jokes were always framed as teasing, delivered with the performative warmth of someone who wanted an audience to see her as playful rather than cruel. Our parents would chuckle, her friends would chuckle, I would smile with the specific pleasantness of a person who has decided that reacting is not the optimal move. She interpreted this as the resigned smile of someone who had accepted their place. She was wrong. Now, the director. His name is Callum. He runs the Harrington Country Club, which is where all of this eventually takes place, with the particular ease of someone who was born knowing how to move through rooms like that one. He is quietly brilliant, very good at his job, and, this is the part relevant to the story, he had been my business partner for approximately 3 years before he was anything else. I had invested in the club during a period when its previous ownership had driven it to the edge of insolvency. Poor capital management, over-leveraged expansion, the specific hubris of an institution that believed its prestige made it immune to arithmetic. It was not immune to arithmetic. I purchased the debt at a significant discount, restructured the obligations, and took a primary shareholder stake as part of the resolution. Callum had been brought in to run the operational side. We spent the first 6 months in professional disagreement about approximately everything, then the following 6 months in professional alignment about approximately everything, then, as these things sometimes go, something else. He and I had been together for 2 years. We kept it private, not hidden exactly. The people in our lives who needed to know knew. We simply did not perform our relationship for an audience. Vivian, who had joined the club 14 months prior on a social membership, had apparently decided, based on what her friends later described to mutual acquaintances as obvious chemistry she noticed, that Callum was going to be her next project. She had been angling for him for nearly a year. He had been professionally courteous and privately bewildered by it, which he described to me over dinner one evening in a way that made me laugh for the first time in what had been a difficult week. I had not told her who I was to the club or to him. I had been waiting, without any specific plan, for the moment that waiting would produce the right opportunity. On a Tuesday in March, Vivian called me. She wanted to have lunch at the club. She was effusive, warm, sisterly, the performance she deploys when she wants something. She said she thought we should spend more time together. She said the club was absolutely stunning and she couldn't wait to show it to me. She said the words, "I think you'll be impressed," with the specific emphasis of someone who anticipates being believed. I said yes. I texted Callum, "My sister just invited me to your club for lunch. I think I'd like to accept." His response, after a moment, "I'll make sure the good table is available." The Harrington Country Club sits on 14 acres on the eastern edge of the city, and it is, objectively, beautiful. The kind of beautiful that requires a significant endowment and a staff that knows the difference between maintenance and curating. The terrace overlooks a course that is perfectly kept in the self-important way of institutions that have decided perfection is their brand identity. I arrived at 12:15 in my CRV with the cracked mirror and handed the keys to the valet without ceremony. Vivian was already on the terrace with 4 of her friends. I could see them from the entrance, the specific tableau of women who have organized their social lives around the performance of having arrived somewhere, dressed in that particular register of expensive casual that communicates membership, not just attendance. She waved when she saw me. The wave was too large, too enthusiastic, the wave of a hostess demonstrating generosity for an audience she hadn't acknowledged was watching. I sat down. The table was the good one. Corner placement, best sight line of the terrace, a slight elevation that made it the natural focal point of the outdoor space. Callum had been thorough. The lunch began pleasantly enough, in the way that events with a planned escalation always have a pleasant early phase, everyone performing normalcy before the script shifts. Vivian's friends were exactly as I had anticipated. Not unintelligent, that's a mistake people make, assuming that a particular kind of social fluency is a substitute for intelligence rather than a separate skill set. They were intelligent in the specific ways their environment had rewarded. They were also intensely attuned to hierarchy, which meant they spent the first 20 minutes of lunch calibrating where I sat in the order of things. The CRV had already registered. Vivian had clocked their calibration and decided this was the moment. She began with the light version, the teasing. Do you remember how she used to iron her clothes the night before school, told to her friend Margot, as if I weren't present? So serious, so concerned with doing everything perfectly. A laugh that contained a message. She needed to try that hard because she was that far behind. Then the direct version. I keep telling her she needs to let me take her shopping. Those shoes, a glance down with a smile that was not a smile. You bought those yourself, didn't you? I looked at her. I said, I did. She said something to Margot about how she'd offered to help me update my wardrobe 100 times, and I was so stubborn about it. I drank my water. Then she moved to the main event, which I had been waiting for, because it told me more about her current anxiety than anything else she had said. Callum is supposed to stop by the terrace today, she said to the table, in the tone of a woman casually mentioning something that is not casual to her at all. He's been very attentive lately. I think... She paused for effect, for the audience she always needed. I think things are moving in a certain direction. Margot made the appropriate sound of delighted anticipation. Vivian glanced at me to check whether I looked impressed or diminished. I looked like a person waiting for the next course to arrive. She interpreted this as inadequacy, a woman so out of her depth in this environment that she couldn't even perform the correct response to the social cue. I want to tell you that what I felt watching my sister arrange her performance for a table of women she was also, beneath all of it, desperate to impress, was not contempt. It was something closer to the feeling I get when I read a financial report that tells a story the company doesn't realize it's telling. A kind of clarity, a kind of data. She was afraid. She had always been afraid. The cruelty had always been about the fear. Then things escalated. A member at a nearby terrace recognized me. I had spoken at a real estate symposium the previous year, the kind of event that Vivian would never attend and her friends would have no context for. and this woman, an architect named Sandra, had been in the audience. She came over to say hello. She used my professional title. She mentioned the symposium. She said something flattering about a development I'd completed the previous spring. I thanked her warmly. She returned to her table. I looked back at Vivian. She was recalibrating. The calibration was visible if you knew what you were watching. She made a decision. She said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "I'm sorry, but how exactly do you know her? Are you sure you're not mixing her up with someone else?" Sandra, across the terrace, gave Vivian a look that communicated several things at once and returned to her conversation. Vivian looked at me. She said, "I'm going to be honest with you because I'm your sister and I love you," the preface that people use when they intend to be neither. "I don't know how you got into this club today, but members don't just bring anyone in. I would have had to sponsor a guest properly. I'm not sure you understood the process." I said, I understood it. She said, "I just want to make sure we don't create a scene, for your sake." I said, "Of course." She studied me for a moment with the expression of a woman deciding whether the mouse is actually cornered or just waiting. Then she signaled to a passing member of the club staff. She said, "Could you please find security? I think there may be someone here who isn't a registered guest." She looked at me when she said, "someone." The terrace, which had already been paying the subtle attention that terraces pay when something interesting is developing, went quieter. The security staff member arrived. He was professional, he was discreet, and he looked at me with the careful neutrality of someone who has been placed in an awkward position and is managing it with grace. Vivian said in the voice she uses when she wants to sound reluctant to do something she absolutely wants to do, "I'm so sorry to involve you in this. I just have some concern that my sister may not be here as a properly registered guest. I wouldn't want anyone to get in trouble." She was performing magnanimity. The security staff member looked at me. I looked at him. I said quietly, "Could you find Callum for me? Tell him Elise is on the south terrace." The security staff member's expression shifted by one precise degree, the recognition of a name given in a context that reclassifies the situation entirely. He said, "Of course, right away." He left. Vivian said to the table, "Well, we'll get this sorted." The tight smile of a woman savoring a victory she had already counted as won. Margot made sympathetic noises in my direction, the performance of pity. I looked at the course below the terrace. The light was very good. And then Callum walked out. I want to describe this properly because it deserves the time. Callum walks into a room the way certain people do, not because he performs it, but because his comfort in his own skin creates a kind of gravity. He was wearing the club's standard director attire. He looked exactly like the man Vivian had spent 11 months trying to position herself beside. He was looking at me when he came through the terrace doors, and the way he was looking at me was not the way a club director looks at a guest's member. Vivian sat up straighter. Callum walked directly to our table. He looked at Vivian, he looked at her friends, and then he looked at the security staff member who had followed him out. He said, "Thank you, you can go." Then he turned to the table. He said with the specific pleasantness of a man holding a great deal in reserve, "Good afternoon. Is there something I can help clarify?" Vivian said, with the breathless warmth she had been cultivating for 11 months, "Callum, I'm so sorry about this. My sister seems to have come as a guest today without going through the proper registration process. I was just trying to sort it out." Callum looked at her. He said, "What's the concern?" She said, "Well, the guest policy. Members are responsible for their guests, and I wasn't aware she was coming as mine." He said, She isn't here as your guest. She's here in her own right. A pause. Vivian said, I'm sorry. He said, She isn't here as your guest. She's here in her own right. Vivian recalibrated again, faster this time. I don't think that's right. Non-members need to be sponsored. Callum looked at her with the specific patience of a man who has decided to be thorough. He said, I want to make sure I'm being precise, because I think there's a genuine misunderstanding and I'd like to resolve it clearly. He paused. The Harringtons' primary shareholder restructured our debt position 3 years ago. Without that intervention, the club would have entered insolvency proceedings. The shareholder holds a permanent stake in the club's ownership structure and has indefinite access to all club facilities. Vivian said after a moment, Who is the shareholder? Callum looked at me. He said, Elise. I watched Vivian's face process this information. The processing was visible. I have thought about it since, and I think what I was watching was not just comprehension, but the simultaneous collapse of several narratives she had been running in parallel. The narrative of my poverty, the narrative of her status in this specific room, the narrative of Callum as a man whose attention she had earned, all three at once. Callum was not finished. He said, I also want to address something else, because I think it's relevant context. He looked at Vivian, not unkindly, but with the directness of a man who has decided that clarity is more respectful than softness. I've been aware for some time that you've had certain expectations about our relationship. I want to be straightforward with you, because I think you deserve that. Elise and I have been together for 2 years. She is my partner. The way I've been at this table in the last 30 seconds, a small gesture between himself and me, is the way I have been for 2 years. He looked at me. He said, quietly, with the ease of someone for whom this is simply the truth, I'm sorry it took me a moment to get out here. The afternoon meeting ran over. I said, It's fine. The view is good from this table. He said, I'll join you for the last of lunch, if that works. I said, It does. He pulled out the chair beside me and sat down. I looked at Vivian. She was looking at the table's surface. Her friends were looking at each other, the rapid, wordless communication of people recalibrating their understanding of a situation and specifically their position within it. Margot picked up her water glass, put it down, picked up her phone. I said to Vivian, not unkindly, because I meant it without cruelty, the terrace really is beautiful at this hour. I should have come more often. She said nothing. The lunch ended shortly thereafter. Here is what happened in the weeks and months that followed. Word moved through Vivian's social network with the speed that information moves when it is true and shocking and contains the specific ingredient that makes it travel fastest: status reversal. Margot had texted people before she left the parking lot. By the time I was home, the shape of the afternoon had already been distributed to an audience Vivian would have been horrified to think of as her audience. Vivian called our mother. I know this because our mother called me 40 minutes later, in a state I had never heard her from before. Not quite distress, not quite apology, the state of a woman realizing that the family narrative she had maintained for decades had a flaw she hadn't accounted for. She said, Why didn't you tell us? I said, You didn't ask. She was quiet for a moment. I told her I had to go, and I did. The social membership Vivian held at the club was reviewed. I want to be precise about this. I did not revoke it. I have no interest in using my position to punish people for things I can address by other means, and the afternoon at the terrace had addressed everything that needed addressing. What happened was that Margot and two of the other women from the lunch table quietly withdrew their association with Vivian. Not dramatically, this social set does not do drama in the open. They simply became unavailable. Invitations stopped. Group chats went quiet in the specific way of group chats that have been continued elsewhere without someone's inclusion. Vivian, facing the prospect of a social membership at a club where her primary social connections had dissolved and where the club's director was partnered with her sister, chose not to renew. The official reason given to the club administration was scheduling conflicts. My father called. He is a man who communicates in understatement, which is either a virtue or a limitation depending on the situation. He said he'd been thinking about things. He said he wasn't sure he'd always seen the full picture. He said he hoped I knew they were proud of me. I told him I appreciated it. I meant that I appreciated the call more than the words, because the call required something from him that the words alone did not. Our relationship is not repaired. That's not how these things work. A phone call is a beginning of a revision, not the revision itself, but it was a beginning. I want to leave you with the thing I actually believe, as opposed to the satisfying narrative of revenge that this story has the structure of. I did not plan that afternoon. I accepted Vivian's invitation, knowing the shape of what she intended, and I allowed it to proceed, and the conditions I had built over years, the investment, the partnership, the relationship with Callum, meant that the afternoon revealed what it revealed. But I did not orchestrate her humiliation. I simply declined to prevent it. There is a distinction there that matters to me. The most powerful thing I did in that story was not the moment on the terrace. It was the 14 years of quiet before it. 14 years of not defending myself when her jokes were made. 14 years of allowing people to underestimate me, because underestimation is the most useful condition a person in my position can operate in. 14 years of building, acquiring, learning, in the absolute privacy of a life I never felt the need to perform for an audience. Vivian's power was always dependent on an audience that believed her version of who I was. I never tried to change the audience's mind. I simply built in the background until the day the audience saw the truth for themselves. And by that point, nothing I said or didn't say could change what they had seen. Silence is not passivity. Silence is a strategy. Stillness is not weakness. Stillness is patience with a direction. And letting arrogant people dig their own graves is not cruelty. It is the most honest thing you can do for someone who has decided, despite all available evidence, that they are invincible. They are not invincible. They are just very loud. If this story found you at a moment when you needed to hear it, you know where the subscribe button is.